Okay, cool. I then, quickly moving along, I just wanted to talk about collective consciousness and also how, like, we change atomically, like materially all the time, and we still kind of maintain our identity, though. It seems like it's, like, it's not broken. And then I was just going to say how perhaps, there's sort of maybe an organic collective consciousness that might have formed this universal mind, but there's no reason to ascribe, like, anthropomorphic human traits to it, but, where, for example, like us, we're made up of millions or trillions of cells, but yet we're sort of, as a whole, we're one essential being. So I'm just going to see what you thought about that, like a collective consciousness.
My answer would be, what evidence do you have for such a thing, right?
Right.
You can make an argument that is plausible, right? That if you have a complex enough network, that maybe there's some emergent behavior that will come from this network. So I can kind of buy it up to that point, but there needs to be evidence for this collective unconscious or global consciousness or whatever in order to fully buy into it. You have to have something that you can observe.
Okay.
And I don't even begin to buy into it.
Okay. Really?
Not even close. You talk about our identity being persistent, despite the fact that the individual atoms and molecules that make up my brain have changed over years, and none of them are the same as when I started out. It doesn't matter. There has been a continuity of identity that is critical to the label that I put on me, and that is critical to the emergent property of consciousness that comes from my brain. When all of those constituent elements disperse, when I die, when there's no longer any neural electrochemical activity going on, I'm done. There is no me that continues, and we have not identified any sort of consciousness beyond the individual brains that we interact with. So until somebody, it's science fiction until somebody comes up with some reason why it could possibly be true and why we should likely consider to be true, and then provide evidence that it is most likely true. And we haven't even gotten past the first stage.
So you see it as emergent property of the network of cells, and then it's a continual process because even though it's changing, you're biologically changing along simultaneously, basically.
Yeah, the definition of me changes. This pen has a whole bunch of different parts to it, but I'm going to call it this pen. And if I remove this little piece of plastic right here, and I get a replacement piece of plastic and put it on here, I'm still going to call it this pen because my definition of this pen has changed to include the new elements that replace the old ones. But there has been a continuity of this pen. This particular item changed, but and for a short period during that change, the definition of this pen excluded that. Now, if I took all of this apart and strung it out along the table, I don't still have this pen. I have the constituent elements of this pen. It has ceased to have the identity, and this is something that we ascribe to it. And this isn't a superb example because we're talking about a clear little physical thing as opposed to in the example that I use all the time, which I blatantly stole from Dennett, is how many molecules of water are required for it to have the property wet. One molecule of water isn't wet.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Wet is a property that emerges from it. And yet nobody would deny that if I dump a bucket of water on you, you're now wet. You have experienced the wetness.
Right on. So basically, and so I guess you don't consider consciousness all distinct from the biology then, basically. It's kind of what you're concluding. Okay. These are all good discussions here. And then I guess, because there's like as above, so below, as within, so without, and that's kind of, I would say like the best example I could give would be ourself, but I see your point.
Yeah.
And then finally, I was going to say, I know a lot of times people talk about, how to kind of talk to these especially like fundamental, say Christians, for example, who are like damning people to hell eternally if they don't buy into their dogmatic descriptions of Jesus and so forth, and basically almost like threaten people with that and so forth. And
it is a threat.
I guess, and one of the things that used to really sort of get under my skin, because it's like I don't even think I'd want to believe in a God that set up reality where
it's meant to get under your skin. It's emotional manipulation, is what it is.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It's exactly what it is. It's emotionally, and then emotional manipulation is a good way of putting it. And they've kind of been, I guess they sort of buy into it, or grew up that way, or for different reasons. They had personal experiences, and then ascribe it to, the Bible, the God of the Bible, or the Quran, and so forth.
If you become steeped so much into a religious dogma or whatever, then it becomes the ambient explanation for anything that's out of the ordinary, right? You see people who think that they see visions of the Virgin Mary, right, in car exhaust somewhere.
Condoms.
Or condoms.
That's my new favorite.
That was the latest one, right?
Yeah.
Or on a piece of toast or some silly thing, right? And it's because they're so steeped.
In dog's blood or something like that.
Yeah, they're so steeped in this culture that's almost imprinted on them, like with a sledgehammer. And so, therefore, when they see anything like that, I can remember a spilt ice cream cone in Houston years back that got religious fervor around it. It's crazy, right? So what you're seeing here is the same sort of thing. If you're so steeped in this religious upbringing, then anything out of the ordinary or anything whatever is explainable via this dogma.
But the threat of hell in particular, the idea of some kind of cosmic justice, even if it's a perversion on what we might consider justice, is appealing. When you add to this the divisive us and them mentality that accompanies religions like Christianity, Islam, etc., what you have is a system where we are the ones that are going to be rewarded. And even if, as in many Christians will say, it's not because we deserve it, but because God has graced us and would perhaps like to grace other people as well. That's how you get to this. It's a caring warning. We don't want you to have to go to hell. So we want to help. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean you don't want me to have to go to... Where did this hell come from?
Yes.
And where did the rules come from that determine whether or not I go there? And, oh, by the way, whether or not you believe that this God created a hell, and whether or not you believe that this God created the rules, if you believe that this God created the universe, did he have some choice in how he created the universe? Because... and did he know how it was going to end? Because if he had a choice and he knew, then he knew he was creating a universe where I would be, by the rules, destined for hell.
Exactly.
And that makes him responsible. And if he created the only universe he could possibly create, then why give him any credit? I mean, clearly there is some set of rules for universe creating that transcend this God. And life and existence and the rules are not any kind of gift from this being. It's something that he had to adhere to, which means he's not all-powerful, and yet somehow the Christians believe that in either case this God can create a loophole to these rules by coming down and pretending to be human and giving up a weekend.
Interesting. And something else interesting too, I think, is that I think that like different, we'll call them kings and so forth. Like I think through my research, it seems that Yeshua or Jesus the Christ actually taught, if he was a real person and so forth. From my research in the original languages and so forth, was that he, as a human being, actually taught universal reconciliation, and that hell, or the word fire in Greek, actually was per, which stemmed into purify. So it's like God's fire, these are all just words and labels, but was actually like a corrective experience. Like if you keep making the same mistake, eventually you learn from it and move on. That was the original idea of and hell was a word that was inserted later. Originally it was like 4 other words.
Yeah, I did a whole lecture on the history of hell where you have Hades, Gehenna, Sheol, etc.
Exactly.
But
yes, the meaning does change.
Saying that there is some original intent is...
It's like
no offense to you, but you're engaging in something that I find to be virtually useless. And it's the same sort of thing that people have been engaged in since, for thousands of years, which is, was there somebody, and did they say this, and what did they originally say, and what did that mean?